Now, walk into almost any management meeting today, especially across many Kenyan organizations, and you're going to notice this unspoken rule just sort of hovering over the boardroom table. It dictates exactly who speaks, what data actually sees the light of day, and how quickly everyone rushes to a consensus. That unspoken mantra, it's simply, don't rock the boat. It's this incredibly strong drive for conformity. We're looking at a deeply ingrained reality in corporate culture where pushing back isn't just frowned upon, it is actively suppressed.
Let's just state the problem directly here. For most professionals sitting in that boardroom, fitting in and staying quiet feels a whole lot safer than swimming upstream. When you push back, you risk being labeled a disruptor or a bottleneck. So when you're thinking about your career trajectory, and frankly, your ability to pay your mortgage, making waves just feels like an unnecessary hazard. Disagreement is treated as a literal career risk. Alignment, on the other hand, is heavily rewarded. So what do? We nod, we agree, we conform.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this brings up a really urgent question from organizational research. We look at a room full of nodding heads and we pat ourselves on the back. We call it synergy or good management. But what if it's the exact opposite? What if that culture of congruence is not actually a sign of organizational health, but a glaring warning sign that something is deeply wrong? Today, we're unpacking 3 key ideas that totally dismantle the myth that absolute agreement is good for business.
Section 1. The illusion of certainty. You see, in business, our brains absolutely lust after certainty. Dealing with ugly, complicated business realities is painful. So naturally, we gravitate toward the comfort of being absolutely sure. Being right feels like competence. But Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman pointed out a massive flaw in how we evaluate this. He basically said that declarations of high confidence mainly tell you that an individual has constructed a coherent story in their head. It absolutely does not tell you that the story is actually true. High confidence often just masks a total lack of real evidence.
And this brilliantly illustrates the psychological trap we fall into every day. Look at the contrast. On one side, you have the coherent story. It feels correct, it perfectly aligns with our assumptions, and the person pitching it is super confident. But on the other side, you have the true story. And the true story is often backed by hard, messy evidence. It's ambiguous, and frankly, it is deeply uncomfortable. When we demand certainty from our teams, we're basically forcing them to invent that neat little coherent story on the left while completely ignoring the messy truth on the right.
Section 2. The congruence ceiling.
So what happens when an entire organization demands that kind of certainty? Well, we hit the congruence ceiling. Author David Epstein notes that congruence is a term for a cultural fit among an institution's values and goals, and since the 1980s, business schools have taught this as the ultimate pillar of organizational theory. A good manager aligns everything, right? Everyone rows in the same direction. And it makes sense why we like it. We naturally crave that consistency like we crave a bag of salty tortilla chips. It just feels orderly.
But here's the catch. Psychologist Philip Tetlock warns that cultures can actually be entirely too internally consistent. When everyone thinks exactly the same way, you have absolutely zero defense against a bad idea. Tetlock points out, with incongruence, you're building in cross-checks. Thinkers who can actually tolerate ambiguity make the best decisions because they're forced to use more than one tool. A degree of ambiguity shouldn't be eliminated as a threat. It literally has to be built in as a vital cross-check.
The research is crystal clear on this. The most effective organizations are not rigidly uniform. They are beautifully paradoxical. They have range. They can be demanding and nurturing, orderly and entrepreneurial, hierarchical and individualistic, all at the exact same time. By embracing this paradox, they broaden their decision-making toolbox. They don't just survive ambiguity, they actively use it to learn faster.
Section 3. The Challenger Warning. Let's move to and see how this builds into real-world consequences. I want to slow down here, because the date is January 28, 1986. It's an unusually cold Florida morning, and NASA is facing a critical, high-stakes decision: launch the Space Shuttle Challenger or delay it. The circumstances were highly unusual, and they simply did not have perfect clear data right in front of them about how the shuttle's components would react to the freezing cold. They had to make a massive call in the face of pure ambiguity.
The result of that decision was an explosion shortly after launch. 7 astronaut lives were lost. It remains one of the most devastating events in the history of spaceflight. But listen, the failure wasn't just mechanical. The true failure was deeply, tragically cultural.
When we look back at NASA during that specific time, there wasn't some dramatic, mustache-twirling villain calling the shots.
Instead, there was a management culture that had become completely blinded by its own past successes. They were bound to this impossible launch schedule just to keep funding flowing. And over time, they'd grown increasingly impatient with the technical delays that operating a complex machine actually requires. Crucially, they had developed this dismissive attitude toward the warnings coming directly from their own engineering community.
The Columbia Accident Investigation Board later concluded exactly why this happened. They found that NASA's absolute allegiance to hierarchy and procedure, their strict demand for organizational congruence, literally silenced the engineers who knew there was a problem. The culture simply wouldn't allow pushback, and it ended in disaster. It definitively proves that a little pushing back isn't a bad thing. It's a life-saving essential. When a culture stops tolerating healthy dissent, the consequences can literally be fatal.
So look closely at your own organization today, especially as we navigate the Kenyan management landscape. Are your meetings ending with everyone nodding while the real problems go completely unspoken? We need to understand the very real difference between healthy disagreement and destructive conflict. If your organization consistently rewards alignment over accuracy, if it punishes the one person brave enough to point out flawed data, that is the conversation worth having right now before the damage is done. If you're ready to build a culture that actually embraces those vital cross-checks, visit www.acatalyst.co.ke. Because ultimately, you have to ask yourself, in your next meeting, will you demand the comforting illusion of agreement, or are you brave enough to hear the uncomfortable truth?